Don't worry about the bend. The 8-iron saw has a good way. The 1-flower wood is good. The maintenance technology is good. The engine bend of this blade in front of you is older than the owner, so the owner who can't find the accessories can only come to the ancient-style repair shop for repair. First of all, before the master officially repairs, he will first use the card to measure the length of the blade position. So they need to cut and repair the broken part, because the broken part is a conical structure, and the important thing is that they don't have a dedicated cardboard, so the master can only fix a small cardboard on the large forklip's cardboard. This can make the fixed position conical. Because of this fixation, it is necessary to use the scraper to find the center of gravity. So after making sure there is no problem, at this time, you can use the chair to heat it up because the bend is very hard, and they use a normal saw. Only by reducing the hardness of the blade, the normal saw can work, because they will use the saw to cut the blade. The master will gradually smooth the blade. Of course, the purpose of this is to leave enough space for the small round piece to ensure that the cut is the same thickness between the 3 sections. The master will use a sugar knife to cut the inner hole. By expanding the inner diameter, the joint will be more solid. After the processing, the other section can be processed. To make it easier to fix, the master will use a hammer to knock down the gear. When fixing, the only thing needed is to use a scraper to find the synchronization. Then heat it with a hot iron. The processing steps on this side are basically the same as the other side. The master only needs to smooth the uneven surface, then process the inner mirror. Cutting it gradually will make the hole fit. After the processing, the master will use the card to measure the position. Then he can use the standard data processing rod to make up for the length. First, the master will use a normal saw to cut the gap. Then, he will use a special cutting blade to cut the gap. The cutting process is done very quickly by the master's careful cutting. Next, the master needs to process the whole thing carefully, because the 2 sides of the bend have been processed into a positioning hole for out-to-and-out connection. So the master only needs to process the small pieces for the connection. The process of cutting is relatively easy because there is already a standard data for reference. So, after a lot of work, the 3 pieces are all processed. The masters can then connect them together. When connecting, he uses his feeling. Very quickly, the overall synchronization has been found. During the assembly process, he knocks with a small hammer. The assembly process of the bending is almost finished. In order to facilitate the subsequent processing of the rolling curve, the master will weld a piece of iron on the bevel, because the iron has a center hole in the middle. This can be used to support the top of the seat. For the joint between the 2 sections of the bend, they will use electric welding to make a fine welding fixation, then use the car knife to make a fine cut with the uneven welding. In order to ensure that the size of the curve will not be deviated, the master was very careful when cutting the curve. After all, if the curve is too much, it will definitely lead to the early work and the late work. Finally, after a lot of practice, the straightness of the curve has been processed. Then the master only needs to cut the fixed iron plate. After watching the whole maintenance process, how do you feel about this maintenance method? How do you feel about this maintenance method? If you give it 10 points, how many points would you like to give?